the F1 Focus Podcast with Welman and Hendrik Verwoerd.
Welcome back to Formula One Focus, an action-packed Canadian Grand Prix, one of my favourites, I would think. Not everybody's favourite. I see Nico Rosberg and Danica Patrick had a bit of a spat over that. What did you think of that? And welcome back, Hendrik, firstly. Let's say bye, and then what did you think of that spat?
Hi, MV. Nice to be back with you again. I have no idea what Nico and Danica had to say to each other, but I found it a very interesting, entertaining race. I wouldn't say it was dramatic. Yeah, of course, we had a bit of a dramatic end to it, but as the race progressed, it really built up to a beautiful climax. I thought the last 15 or 20 laps was fascinating to see how the different tire strategies worked out and the different, the pit stop strategies and so on. So it really built up nicely to the climax that one would like to see in a Grand Prix race, and that's exactly what we got. With the addition, of course, to with the clash at the end with the two teammates, McLaren guys, finally clashing. Something that I think we've all expected to happen sometime during the course of the season. Now it's happened.
Yeah, before we continue, make sure to hit that subscribe button and like us and follow us, and make sure that you become a follower of this channel. We'd appreciate your support. Talking about that McLaren accident, a sense of deja vu, exactly almost a replica of what happened in 2011, that infamous race, the longest race ever, 4 hours, 4 minutes and 39 seconds. And that was both the McLarens as well. I wonder what's the story there.
Same team and exactly the same spot and exactly the same incident as you mentioned. It was Jenson Button and Lewis Hamilton at the time. Hamilton tried to take that exact same gap that Lando tried to do on Sunday, and the result was exactly the same. Jenson, of course, came off unscathed, just like Oscar did, and Jenson went on to win that race. As you say, it's a race that we all remember. It's something like 4 hours and something, and after that, a rule was brought in that the total race distance or the total race duration cannot be longer than 4 hours, and the race itself should be 2 hours. But anyway, so yeah, exactly the same thing. Lando tried to take the gap or go through a door opening that wasn't quite there and was closing. You cannot blame Oscar for that, because he certainly would not have expected that, and there's no question that he should have left that space open. That's not an overtaking spot. But the whole thing actually started, a little bit earlier when Lando took the inside line through the hairpin and actually got ahead in that maneuver, but then he lost the lead, and Oscar got a better exit out of the hairpin. So Lando certainly showed his intent. And he thought, by his own admission, that there was a gap, which there wasn't, and he was very quick to apologize to both his teammate and his team afterwards. In fact, on the radio, he said, "Sorry, it was my bad. It's all my fault." So, there's no question about whose fault it was. And in fact, the stewards actually gave him a penalty, despite the fact that he retired after the end of the race. He actually got a 5-second time penalty added to his race time, which was non-existent because he was a non-finisher. So, a symbolic time penalty, because he was the sole reason for that accident. He was given it for causing a collision, which he did.
It's interesting why they gave him a 5-second penalty and not a grid drop. Is because he was actually classified, because he crashed a lot so late in the race. I read that somewhere. Yeah. If it was earlier, he would have been given a grid penalty for the next race. What was interesting to me, we've been waiting for this moment where these two cars are going to go head to head, and my heart was in my mouth. After you said Lando overtook him at the hairpin, and they were sort of out dragging each other down that long straight there, and eventually Lando had to give way. And I actually thought something was going to happen there, and it didn't. And then it happened right the next corner. But it was inevitable. We've all been waiting for it. Do you think it's going to have an influence now on the relationship between the drivers, or is it still just a storm in a teacup?
Well, it's very difficult to say. From the outside, looking at the kind of relationship that the two have, they seem to be pretty good mates. Unlike the two Mercedes drivers earlier on, Nico himself and Lewis, when they were teammates, and that infamous crash that they had in Spain that year, when the one didn't want to give it way to the other, and both of them crashed out. But they had not the same kind of relationship. They never had one like the two of them. And the fact, I think that Lando has has admitted his guilt to it and immediately did so, and Oscar then accepted it. I don't think so. I think both of them knew at some point it was going to happen. In fact, Lando was quoted before the race. I think it was on Friday or Saturday. He was quoted before the race. He was saying that, it's just not when it's going to happen, but not if it's going to happen, it's when it's going to happen. And then on Sunday it did happen. I don't think it's going to be the first of or the last one. I think it's going to be the first of a number of similar situations as the season progresses and as the season, the championship hots up, because it's clearly going to be between the two of them. Although I think there's a bit of a caveat to that, and maybe we can discuss that situation, because I think what is happening at the moment, Max is actually becoming the beneficiary of the battle ahead of him. But that's a bit of an aside. So I think as the season progresses and the championship hots up, I think we're going to see more of this. What can McLaren do? They can't do anything apart from saying, guys, do not take each other out. Those are the rules. You cannot, at this point in the season, we're not even halfway through yet. They cannot at this point of the season say, we're going to favor the one over the other, because it's 22 points now. There are 12, 20, we have had 10. There's 14 races still to go. 22 points. That is just one retirement for Oscar and one, at the same time, a win for Lando. 25 points. And then the whole situation is turned around. So you cannot favor the one over the other. I don't think that there's much debate about which of the two is the one that is most likely to become the champion, because he's not making all the mistakes. Oscar doesn't. Lando keeps on making mistakes. I think the fact that he was in the situation that he found himself in the race was because of mistakes that he made in qualifying on Saturday. He could very well have qualified ahead of Oscar, and then the whole situation would have turned around or been the other way. So, yes, Oscar has got the lead at the moment, and 22 points it's a good lead, but it's certainly not a safe lead, and it's certainly not a situation where the team has to say, okay, he's now the number one, and Lando's got to support him. It can very well turn around and be the opposite of that. So, I think they've got the correct approach. McLaren has never been the kind of team where they would give a hierarchy between the two drivers. They've never had a situation really where they've had a number one and a number two. They let the guys race, and that is what we want to see. I welcome that. Let them race, but let them, keep the team situation in mind. And then inevitably something like this is going to happen when one makes a slight little error of judgment, and the result is that one or both of them would retire. The team don't want that, but I think they are pretty safe in terms of the Constructors' Championship, that they can afford this sort of thing. The two drivers can't afford it because there is Max hanging in the background, and again we saw on Sunday where people or George Russell won the race, taking points off Oscar Piastri and Lando. Obviously, Lando didn't score any points, but the fact that George won and Max could score the maximum that it could, taking points off Piastri. The other guys are taking points off each other. That's the point I'm trying to make. The other guys are taking points off each other, and Max is going to benefit if this continues. And I don't think he's too worried about that situation.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that. 22 points is not much, but the difference between this weekend and all the other previous weekends of this entire year is the McLaren's basically nowhere. I mean, they were still fast and everything, but it's the first time they didn't, at least one of them, end up on the podium. They qualified badly. Mercedes came out of nowhere. We expected them to do well. It's supposedly a cooler race, but even with higher track temperatures, the Mercedes was still doing well. Where does that speed come from now? I mean, that could affect the race going forward. Like you said, that lead is not unassailable. The Red Bull ended second. Let's rather say Max Verstappen ended second, because Red Bull still seems to be a bit of a handful. If you look at Yuki Tsunoda's performance or non-performance for that matter. The point is, McLaren suddenly a little bit on the back foot, or do you think it's a new trend, or is it sort of a once-off?
Yeah, I don't think it's a new trend. I think it's a bit of a one-off. If you look at the nature of the circuit, it's a circuit with long straights and short corners. Basically, there's no real fast corners there, and that's where McLaren is strong in the fast corners. The car's predictable. It doesn't, have either understeer or oversteer in the fast sweeps. And exactly the same reason why I think Mercedes was probably fast, because it's in the fast corners generally at other circuits, fast corners and high temperatures. that they tend to work their tires too hard, and that they get, degradation and sometimes even graining. So I think this was a one-off. I'm not sure that Mercedes did have a new rear suspension, I believe, for this last weekend. Maybe it could be a factor. Who knows? But I don't know whether Mercedes actually knows exactly why they are slow and why they are fast at certain, at certain points and under certain conditions and at certain track layouts. I think McLaren kind of know, it's not that they were nowhere. They were just not, they were certainly the second fastest, if not the fastest on the day, as far as race pace is concerned. But in terms of one lap, and of course, Lando made a mistake. Oh, more than one mistake in qualifying. So, those are factors. But McLaren is going to be competitive, if not the fastest car of the lot on I think most circuits this season. That's just the way it's working. Ferrari, again, can be competitive at under certain circumstances. I still think that they are suffering from the fact that they can't run the cars as low to the ground as they would like to. That's after the disqualification in China. And Red Bull again it's a very, very finicky car to drive, as we have said many times. Max is able to do that, but nobody else is able to do that. So they are fighting with their one hand behind their backs. I think Max could possibly still remain a championship contender, but they certainly, as a team, is not going to be anywhere close to the Constructors' Championship this year. So, yeah, I think Christian Horner must, try to do everything that he possibly can to try and upset the opposition, which is clearly what he did with Mercedes after the race on Sunday.
Yeah, that's what I was going to talk to you about next. A nice little spicy rivalry between George and Max, and also between Red Bull and Mercedes to a degree. That's always been there, but it's back on the menu. Red Bull protesting against George's victory. What's the story there? And then also George, getting in a couple of jabs there during the course of the weekend, mentioning the fact that he's got some penalty points to play with, and a bit of a mental warfare between the two of them.
Well, the whole situation with Max, and he's still in that position that if he gets one more point on his record at the next race, even he was in that situation going into Canada, and that situation will be exactly the same when he goes to his home race in Austria. One more point, and he's got to sit out the race, and that puts him in a situation where the opposition is able to, I think, try and undermine him and his team, and that is exactly, I think, what George did. When George got the pole position on Saturday and he was interviewed afterwards, he got the little dig in there saying that at least he's got it. When he was asked what he expects into the first corner, because everybody was saying that first corner, it's Max and George next to each other. It's going to be they're going to either have contact or take each other out or whatever. And he was asked about that, and George said, "Well, at least I've got a few more points to play with." So I think that sort of set the scene. Max was already quite angry about being asked by the media on a number of occasions over the weekend about his situation. Got pretty peed off about that whole thing. And I think it all showed that this situation is getting under the skin of the team, and it's going to remain like that, I think, until if he keeps his nose clean in Austria and he loses those 3 points on his record after Austria, then I think it's probably going to be be back to normal for them. But they certainly feel it, I think, and I think that probably played a role in the protest that they put in after the race. They probably protested the victory and saying that George was driving erratically behind the safety car, and he wasn't keeping the distance, and he was trying he was showing unsportsmanlike behavior when he told his team that Max was overtaking him under the yellow, and all that kind of thing. But it was all dismissed by the stewards afterwards because it was regarded as a normal situation. But again, the fact that they complained about George pointing out that Max was overtaking him, that's all part of that whole psychological battle going on behind the scenes. And of course, that also led to a bit of a contretemps between Toto Wolff and Chris Horner afterwards. when Toto said, about the protests, it's just, it's ridiculous and it's childish and that sort of thing. It's kind of reminiscent of the days when it was Mercedes and Red Bull fighting it out for the championship. So, those two, I don't think are still are not on each other's Christmas card list.
Definitely. But it's also a case of the pot calling the kettle black.
Of course. Of course.
Okay, I wanted to talk to you about everybody's second team, I suppose, my second team anyway, Williams. I mean, a lot of expected track suits them. Sainz was a bit Archer got in his way, couldn't qualify properly. But there was so much potential. And then Albon, we heard Albon during the race complaining about the team not listening to him when it comes to strategy, and he fell behind as we should have expected, and then he fell out of the race. So he had to retire. I don't know, I've got this sneaking suspicion that suddenly everything is not that, smelling like roses in Williams. There seems to be something there.
Yeah, and I think it's from a kind of a strange angle. It's probably a good thing because they have become used to performing better and being more competitive. Where in the past it was just they couldn't do anything because they were not competitive and there was no possibility of even becoming competitive. And they are now. Have been for a while, been in a situation, I'm not saying, competitive in terms of wins, but at least competitive in terms of the midfield. And of course, they are no longer at the bottom of the rung like they've been for a number of occasions, or a number of seasons. So, when things go well and you become used to things, well, let's say when things go better and you are getting used to things going better, when there is then something that irritates you or irks you, or maybe you feel puts you in a position where you cannot, perform better, then, I think those things are going to surface. And I think that's probably natural. I think it's a good sign in terms of where the mindset is in that team. I'm sorry for poor old Carlos. I mean, okay, he scored the point. But yeah, he was very frustrated, and he's not been happy ever since the beginning of the season. And he's been saying that he's also getting used to the team and the way they work and the way that the car handles and the way that he needs to drive the car and has to adjust his driving style. But we've had 10 races now. And to be fair, he wasn't angry with the team, Carlos. He was angry with Hadjar. Quite right, but that compromised his qualifying. That compromised his race as well, and eventually he did come through and score the point. So yes, I think things are not going very smoothly in that team, but I think for positive reasons. And I think all they need to do, James Vowles just need to pull them together and say to them, look, guys, we are doing much better than we used to do. We are on the up. Our trajectory is rising. And so, therefore, the demands are going to be higher and the pressure is going to be higher for everybody to do with it. They cannot be happy with the Mercedes failure. And, I'm sure they need to talk to Mercedes about that as well.
Yeah, we talked about it last week, the engine failures by Mercedes.
Yeah.
Now, plenty of them now. That's quite an interesting one. Another team on the up now, you mentioned team being up, is Aston Martin. Suddenly, Alonso, according to him, is now gelled with the car since the latest upgrades. Looking better, scored points now twice in a row. Lance Stroll, once again, nowhere as to be expected. And I still wonder whether that's a case of dead man walking. But what do you think is happening at Aston Martin?
Well, one can wonder about the wisdom of getting Lance Stroll back in the car, less than 2 weeks after a major operation on his hand. But obviously it was the home race, the home crowd, and that would probably have been the major cause or the major reason for that decision. But he was nowhere. He wasn't there in practice, he wasn't there in qualifying, and he certainly wasn't there in the race itself. Whereas, as you say, Fernando has now shown that after the upgrade that they had in Spain, they scored points in Spain, and now they scored points in Canada as well. It seems like, I said that last week, it's one race is a little bit early, but it's now 2 races. And Fernando is showing his value to the team. He's showing that he can take that car and maximize what the performance of that car and score the points when the points are available. And he showed that he could do that. And that came from qualifying well. If you can get the most out of the car, if a car is quick in qualifying, in most cases, of course there are exceptions, but in most cases, if you qualify well, then you tend to remain competitive in the race, and if you qualify in the top 10, you tend to be in the points at the end of the race as well, generally speaking. And he's doing that. Fernando's doing that. Interesting little rumor that has since emerged, and that is that Aston Martin is looking at possibly getting George Russell in next year, because George has not signed his Mercedes contract yet. Now, I think that's a little bit far-fetched, personally, but I think the fact that, these rumors are often planted by people for specific reasons. It could be for to destabilize the opposition, or it could be to maybe open a door that many regarded wasn't open before. I've seen that many times, that somebody in a team would whisper something in the ear of a journalist. He would then pick it up and maybe run with it, and that's how rumors start. And they do it on purpose, to try and stir things up. So to me, if that is the way that this rumor started, because that's certainly the first time that I've seen it, it might be an indication that Aston Martin could be starting to move towards a decision to get rid of Lance Stroll. They're not going to get rid of Fernando Alonso next year, but they could maybe start thinking about the possibility, putting it as wide as that. Start thinking about the possibility of replacing Lance with somebody, and why not get George? He's not got a contract with Mercedes yet, and he's a proven race winner, and him and Fernando would be a very good combination. I'm saying this could be the thinking, that him and Fernando could well be a very good combination in the new dispensation in 2026. So not many people have picked up on that. I don't think it's a serious rumor. I do think that Mercedes and George are going to renew his contract, because there's no reason not to. Toto is certainly not going to get hold of Max next year. There's no question about that. Maybe the year after, who knows? But is he going to offer George just a 1-year contract with that in mind? I don't think so. So I think the more realistic outcome of this whole situation is that George and Mercedes will conclude their negotiations over the summer break, and make that announcement, in that period. And I don't know what Aston Martin is going to do with Lance Stroll. I have said it many times that if they want to be a championship contender as a team, they need to get 2 competitive drivers. And Lance is not slow, but he's inconsistent. He's certainly not somebody who's going to be a regular point scorer next to Fernando Alonso. So that's the decision that they've got to make.
Another team that scored points again, Nico Hülkenberg for Sauber. Suddenly he seems to be, or what do you call him lately? Stake Sauber, I don't know. Audi's team for next year. That team seems to be on the up a little bit as well. Jonathan, we talked about it there. Did they doing well?
Again, after a fairly substantial upgrade in Spain. And they have now clearly joined, the midfield. They are no longer, tottering around the back of the field anymore. And as you say, they've now scored on 2 occasions, a very good 5th position for Hülkenberg in Spain. And what was it, 4 points? So that's 8th position in Canada. So that's good. Gabriel is not quite there yet. Bortoleto. I think he's one of the few. Yes, he's one of the few drivers that has not scored a point yet. But anyway, so he's a rookie, and these cars, as I said, every one of them, from the front to the back, are very tricky to drive, and coming even from Formula 2, it's not that easy. So anyway, I think Sauber is doing well. Or let's not say they're doing well. I think they're on the right track. It seems to be that they've now found a way of unlocking performance in that car, and hopefully they will, be part of the midfield group for much longer.
Now, if you're talking about midfield, inevitably we have to talk about the back markers. And Alpine is the ultimate back marker. Back right at, we would say, Ed Gasly qualified last, didn't have a wonderful race. Colapinto's appointment seems to be a bit of a gamble that's not paying off. And then G broke the news I didn't even know about it. Luca de Meyer, the chief executive of Renault, the Renault group, the guy who's been firing people left, right, and center and bringing Flavio Briatore in and everything else. He's resigned. He's moving on from Renault. What's happening there?
Yeah, that sort of came out of the blue as well. On Sunday morning before the race, the news came and it was confirmed both by the Renault Group and from other sources that he has now retired, or not retired, he's resigned from his position. Luca de Meyer, he's the CEO of the Renault Group, which includes Alpine, the car company, and that, of course, also includes Alpine, the Formula One team. And he's going to become a CEO at some other company that I've also never heard of. But anyway, I think that's a story that is probably going to have quite an effect as we go on. Flavio was asked by the news agency Reuters on Sunday, whether this situation would have any bearing on the Formula One team, on Alpine Formula One team. And Flavio, in his normal brash kind of way, said, no effect at all, absolutely nothing. And I think he's wrong. I think we're going to see, obviously, we're going to see a change in the senior management of the Renault Group, and I think it is quite possible that whoever takes over from De Meyer could look at the Formula One team situation and see that they are not really performing well. Flavio said that they will be in a position to fight for the championship in 2 years from now. and I'm not sure that anybody but him believes that. And so I think that, the new broom is probably going to come in and try to, sweep a little bit clean, to clean up the situation. Why spend this amount of money if it's not doing its primary job? The Formula One team is doing the primary job of the Formula One team in the eyes of the Renault Group board of directors is to be a marketing platform for their sports car division. And if you're running around at the back of the field in Formula One and you are not scoring points at all and you're not competitive at all, then you're certainly not doing your job as a marketing platform for Alpine, and you're costing a lot of money for them, depending on how much they actually spend by the group. And doesn't it make more sense? This team is valued at more than, like every other team, valued at over $1 billion. So why don't take advantage of that situation and sell them? Sell the team, get the money in your pocket, and let them do their own thing and be a problem for somebody else. I'm speculating. I'm obviously speculating, and of course this will have an effect, I think, on what Flavio's position is as well. He was appointed by De Meyer as a sort of an independent consultant. And these kind of positions are normally not salaried. He's not an employee of the company. So he will be on some kind of a commission deal, I suspect. So he will be on a commission deal, and his income would be dependent upon how much money he can bring in, how many sponsors he can bring in, and he will obviously take a percentage of that. If he loses that position, he loses that source of revenue for himself, source of income rather. So I think Flavio is wrong. I do think that this has the potential of having a big effect on the Alpine Formula One team. Hopefully they will be able to sell the team at a reasonable price, and that we do not lose the team. We are getting the 11th team in next year in Audi, but let's hope that we then do not end up with 10 teams again, and they're getting rid of, or they're closing the Alpine team down. I don't think that makes sense at all. But anyway, so yeah, that's a story that I think we need to keep an eye on.
Yeah, the 11th team next year is Cadillac, of course. Audi is joining, having taken over Sauber. But the thing is, until very recently, this would have, pointed the way towards Hitech maybe acquiring Alpine. But that was before Oliver Oakes resigned unexpectedly as the CEO or the team principal, of Alpine. So now suddenly you start wondering, is there actually a buyer? Is there still interest in buying a team? What's the story?
Well, I think there will be a buyer of any Formula One team in the current situation, because these teams are highly valuable, and the prospect of them becoming double or triple the value that they are at the moment within the next 4 or 5 years is a very, very strong prospect. So anybody who's willing to find $1 billion, buy a team, is probably going to get their money back and more, and much more, in the next 4 years, 5 years, probably longer. So I don't think anybody wants to. I don't think anybody wants to sell a Formula One team is going to have trouble to get a buyer, but it will depend on the price. I mean, you can't ask a ridiculous price that nobody's willing to pay. It's like any other product. The value of the product is simply what people are willing to pay for it. So I don't think there's going to be a shortage of buyers, but it's going to depend on the price. Maybe the number of buyers would become smaller and smaller as the price goes up. Obviously, it will. But I don't think there's going to be a real problem of selling it. High Tech, it would make sense for a current Formula 2 team to buy a Formula 1 team simply to take it over. But I don't know whether they've got enough, resources behind them. They do have, I think, some Russian backing, High Tech.
The Mazepins.
Who knows? Yeah, who knows? So that's all to be seen in the future.
Right, talking about Alpine, still there's very strong rumors that Sergio Perez might be Alpine bound rather than Cadillac bound. There's people saying, maybe they're just trying to just destabilize the Cadillac team because they're also chasing Sergio Perez. And the big reason for that is he's very experienced, firstly, and secondly, he's got loads and loads of cash behind him. And you talked about Flavio Briatore taking a cut of money.
Wouldn't Flavio enjoy that? Absolutely.
That's the thing. Flavio is getting a cut from everything. Yeah.
Yeah. All the money that Sergio can bring to the team. Well, I mean, this is Formula One. Nothing is impossible. I would be surprised if that happens. I do think that Sergio probably regards himself as a better driver, having come from Red Bull, and he being a proven race winner, to be willing to go to a back marker with virtually no prospect, I think, of building it up into a competitive and a championship winning team as they are at the moment. Obviously, that can change. So I'm not sure that he's going to be willing to, just simply to get a seat in Formula One. So, again, it's possible. It's a rumor, and Formula One thrives on rumors. And we enjoy rumors, but we must always keep in mind, rumors are there for a particular reason. As I said earlier on, many of them are planted for a particular reason, and one can then speculate about what the reasons are.
I just remembered Otmar Safnauer is putting together kind of a...
Absolutely. And he says he's got the backing, so who knows? He could be. And he's a former team
of Alpine. I say he knows them. Wouldn't that be justice, for the way he was let go if he ends up buying the team? Yeah. I love that. That's just sort of karma, don't you think?
That would be something akin to poetic justice.
Yeah. Right. The other thing that happened, of course, is the premiere of the Formula One movie last night. All the drivers except finally. Max Verstappen pitched up because he's on nappy duty, I suspect. And nobody's allowed to talk about what the movie was, but it was a big thing. They made a big event out of it. Huh?
Yeah, that happened on Monday in New York. The worldwide premiere of, it's now called F1 the movie. I always thought it was only going to be F1, which to me sits better actually as a movie title. So, but anyway, it's F1 the movie, starring Brad Pitt, of course, and also produced by Lewis Hamilton. And as you say, it was a big thing. And I'm pretty sure we're going to see a lot of video footage and a lot of interviews with people, after this now, because the international release date is next Tuesday, the 25th, with the American release date the Friday, the 27th. The drivers had a preview of the team, or of the movie. They saw the movie in Monaco, and I think the international Formula One media also saw it last weekend, with obviously an embargo on what they're allowed to say about the movie. We all know basically what the storyline is. It's about a former driver who's in his 60s who's had a big crash. That's Brad Pitt, and who's been asked by a fledgling team to come and help their young driver, and that's the basic story of it. There's a love story somewhere in there. This is Hollywood after all, but the main thing for us as fans and obviously for those involved in the sport is how realistic this film is. We've seen a number of efforts in the past to try and emulate, what it is like to be in a race and to be racing. And on some occasions it was successful, and on most occasions it was unsuccessful. It was dismal, in fact. The big question is, how realistic is it, and can we, as knowledgeable people who know the sport, can we entertain ourselves with this and say, yeah, that's possible, this is possible. Well, I think, from what I can gather, and obviously I haven't seen anything, from what I can gather from what comes out, between the lines, is yes, it's very realistic. It is possibly the most realistic that you can do. In terms of racing, because the technology they used, and they actually built, 2 cars based on Formula 2 cars. Mercedes built those cars. They actually raced these cars. Brad Pitt actually drove this car at speed. They filmed for the last 2 or 3 years at events itself, and the camera cars were part of the parade lap, I think, at Silverstone at some point. So they were in there. They were in the pits, the actual pits during a race weekend. They had their own pits, the AXGP team. That's what they were called. They had, it's very realistic, and apparently the camera technology that they used is such that you cannot complain about that. It really brings across, what it's like, and obviously the crashes are are spectacular and that sort of thing. But I do think, all of us must just remember, this is not a documentary. It is a Hollywood movie with big stars in it. It's aimed at the general public. It's not aimed at the Formula One fan or even the Formula One fanatic. One has to make provision for that, and you have to take into account it's a Hollywood movie. There is going to be some artistic license taken, and one should accept that, I think. But if the intention is there, and of course Lewis Hamilton was one of the producers, and he sat in the production process from the first day onwards, and he was the one that advised them about the authenticity of camera angles and of things like, the sound of the engine and gear shifts and the lines that the drivers take, because a lot of the movie is also CGI, computer graphics. And so he was very much involved, and he said afterwards, he wouldn't say it's something else, but he was saying afterwards, yes, this is exactly how it is, and he's very satisfied. I don't think he would lie about that. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm not sure where and when I'm going to see it, but I'm certainly looking forward to that. I enjoyed the Senna movie, and I thought that the one with James Hunt in there as well, was it Rush? That was pretty good as well. Also with a lot of artistic license, but pretty good and pretty well done. So I think more of the same, only more authentic. I think that's what we can expect, and I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, can't wait for that anymore. Next race up is Austria, and that's always an exciting one. Red Bull's home race. Maybe they want to go for a try and get a victory for a change. Max typically at turn 3 there feels the need to barge some people off the track there from the past. Looking forward to that one.
Well, that's where he gained some of the points that he's going to lose. The points on his license that he's going to lose if he stays on the narrow path in Austria. It's still a week and a half to go. We can talk about this next week, but it's their home race. It's race won last year by George Russell as well, and he's hopeful that he could repeat his Canadian Grand Prix there. And maybe there we will see, the answer is whether the revival of the Mercedes onslaught is a real revival, or whether Canada was just a one-off. So lots of things to look forward to, I think, in Austria. It's one of the most fantastic tracks, only 10 corners. So high speed corners and tight corners, and, it's elevation changes. It's
track limits.
Really, really good racetrack for Formula One to be on. So certainly something to look forward to.
Thanks, Hendrik. That was exciting and interesting, as always. Appreciate it. Next week, we'll talk about the Austrian Grand Prix, like you said, and maybe we'll have a bit more clarity about what exactly is happening at Alpine. I'm fascinated by that resignation.
Who knows? Cheers.
The F1 Focus Podcast with MV Welman and Hendrik Verwoerd.